At the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, on a Tuesday in March of 1982, the gymnasium floor had not yet warmed from the night before. The overhead lights hummed in the particular way institutional fluorescent bulbs hum when the building is otherwise silent. 41 federal agents sat in folding chairs arranged in 4 rows along the east wall. They were not students in any ordinary sense. They were instructors, men who had already passed every test the government had designed for them, men who had come to this room to learn how to teach. The man standing at the front of the room was named Raymond Coyle. He was 31 years old. He stood 6 feet and 2 inches and carried 221 pounds on a frame that had been built by 11 years of judo competition, a national ranking in Greco-Roman wrestling at 22, and 4 years as a hand-to-hand combat instructor for the United States Marine Corps before his recruitment into the FBI's Defensive Tactics Program. He had a particular credential that mattered in that room above all others. He had never been put on the floor by a student. In 11 years of demonstrating techniques to men who wanted to prove they could resist them, not one had managed to break his structure, displace his balance, or interrupt his execution. The record was not something he advertised. It was simply something that was. In the third row of folding chairs, seated between a deputy U.S. Marshal from the Phoenix field office and a customs agent who had driven up from Jacksonville, was a man in a plain gray sweatshirt, dark canvas trousers, and a pair of worn training shoes that had seen considerably more use than ceremony. He had come in without announcement, sat without introduction, and had not spoken since the session opened 40 minutes earlier. He appeared to be somewhere in his early 40s. He was 5 feet 9. He weighed, by the look of him, 174 pounds. He did not look like a problem. In the next 7 minutes, Raymond Coyle would invite this man to the front of the room to assist with a resistance demonstration. In the 31 seconds that followed that invitation, everything Raymond Coyle believed he understood about distance, leverage, and control would be tested in a way his 11 years had not prepared him for. Nobody in that gymnasium on that Tuesday morning knew they were about to watch something they would still be describing in precise and competing detail 40 years later. If you want to find out what happened in those 31 seconds, make sure you are subscribed to this channel and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. Because what took place in that gymnasium in Glencoe that morning has never been written down in any official record. It lives only in the accounts of the 41 men who were in those chairs. Raymond Coyle had come to his position through a specific kind of accumulation. He had not arrived at the FBI's Defensive Tactics Program through political appointment or administrative convenience. He had been recruited after a demonstration he gave at a law enforcement conference in San Diego in 1978, where 3 senior agents had watched him neutralize a resisting subject during a scenario exercise, and had asked afterward if they could speak with him privately. The recruitment process took 14 months. He passed every component of the evaluation on the first attempt. By 1980, he was the lead instructor for a curriculum that was being taught to federal agents across 9 regional training facilities, and the techniques he had refined, a particular modification to the standing rear control, a series of deflection entries built around forearm-to-forearm contact, had been written into the program's official documentation. He was, by every available measure, among the most credentialed hand-to-hand combat educators operating inside the American federal government in 1982. The agents in those chairs were not there to observe a bureaucrat walk through a slide presentation. They were there because Raymond Coyle was understood, in those specific professional circles, to be genuine. That is a word that will matter before this story is finished. The session that Tuesday morning was structured around what Coyle called the resistance variable, the specific problem of a trained subject who does not comply with standard control techniques, who has enough background to anticipate entries, and who can exploit the half-second gap between a technique's initiation and its completion. It was a narrow subject with broad practical consequences, and Coyle was thorough in his treatment of it. He began with theory, he moved to demonstration, he asked for a volunteer. He looked at the third row, he pointed toward the man in the gray sweatshirt. He said, "I need someone who has some background. You look like you might have some background." The man in the gray sweatshirt looked up. He did not smile. He did not straighten in his chair or look around to confirm the invitation was directed at him. He said, in a voice level enough that the agents in the back row had to lean forward slightly to hear it. "All right." He stood. He did not roll his shoulders. He did not shake out his hands. He walked to the front of the room in the unhurried way a man walks when he has already been to the front of the room many times before, and found nothing unexpected waiting for him there. Raymond Coyle extended his hand and introduced himself. The man shook it and gave his name. He said, "Chuck Norris." The room did not react immediately. Reactions in rooms like that one, among men like those agents, do not come immediately. They arrive in a particular sequence. First there is the internal processing. Then there is the recognition. Then there is the quiet recalibration of everything the person has been assuming for the last several seconds. From the back row, the customs agent from Jacksonville said nothing. He simply set his coffee cup down on the floor beside his chair with deliberate care and straightened his posture. From the second row, a senior agent from the Washington field office turned his head very slowly toward the agent sitting next to him. He did not speak. He simply turned his head. From the front row, the deputy director of the training program, a man named Gerald Hafner, who had been with the FBI for 19 years, and who had reviewed Coyle's curriculum personally, placed both hands flat on his thighs and watched. Raymond Coyle's expression did not change. He was a professional. He understood who was standing in front of him. He understood what that name meant in the specific world they both occupied. He had seen Way of the Dragon. He had read the competition record. He knew about the 7 consecutive international karate championships, the undefeated run in full contact competition, the Tang Soo Do and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu backgrounds, the training relationship with Bruce Lee. He knew all of it, and standing there at the front of a federal gymnasium with 41 agents watching him, he made a decision that men in his position, with his record and his curriculum, and his 11 years of unchallenged instruction, sometimes make. He decided it did not change anything. A fight, at its most technical, is not an exchange of techniques. A fight is a negotiation about distance. Every trained person in a physical confrontation is continuously solving a single problem. How close do I allow this to become, and on whose terms does the distance change? The person who answers that question correctly, consistently, for the duration of the encounter, does not need to be faster, does not need to be stronger, does not need to have a superior technique in any catalog sense. They need only to be correct about distance, more often, and for longer. Raymond Coyle understood this. He had built a curriculum around it. What he did not yet understand, standing at the front of that gymnasium in Glencoe on that Tuesday morning, was that he was about to be given a demonstration of that principle by someone for whom distance control was not a curriculum. It was a language, the first language, the one learned before all others. Coyle explained the technique he intended to demonstrate. It was a standing wrist control entry, an approach designed to give the controlling officer leverage over a resisting subject's posture from a safe initial distance. He would initiate from 6 feet. He would close to control range. He would invite Chuck Norris to resist the entry at full intensity to give the agents watching an accurate picture of what maximum resistance looked like when applied by a trained subject. Chuck Norris said, "All right." They took their positions, 6 feet of gymnasium floor between them, the overhead light steady, the room completely silent. The 31 seconds began. Second one. Coyle stepped forward with his right foot and extended his right hand in the opening movement of the entry sequence. It was a clean, practiced initiation, the kind built by thousands of repetitions. His weight was forward, his eyes were on the center line. Chuck Norris did not move back. He did not raise his hands. He shifted his weight to his rear foot by a margin that an observer from the folding chairs would have estimated at no more than 3 inches. 3 inches of weight transfer, executed at a speed that belonged to a different category of movement than the movement that had prompted it. Coyle's hand arrived at the position where contact was supposed to occur. There was no contact. The geometry had changed by 3 inches and the entry had no target. Second 2. Coyle adjusted. He was an expert. Adjustment was part of the curriculum. He redirected the entry, bringing his left hand into the equation to close the angle that had opened. It was the correct response. The textbook response. Chuck Norris moved again. Not backward. laterally 4 inches to his left, accompanied by a rotation of his centerline that redirected Coyle's angle of approach by approximately 30 degrees. He did not extend his hands, he did not lean, he simply was no longer where Coyle's entry was directed. From the second row, the senior agent from Washington had both arms folded across his chest. He was watching with the specific attention of a man who is watching something he does not yet have language for. Second 3. Coyle committed. He had a curriculum to demonstrate in a room full of federal agents watching him and 11 years of unbroken record behind him. He stepped into a full entry attempt, driving his right arm across to establish the controlling grip, bringing his body weight with it. Chuck Norris's right forearm met Coyle's incoming arm at a point 14 inches from Coyle's body. Not a block, not a parry. A meeting, a piece of contact so brief and so geometrically precise that Coyle's weight, which had been driving the entry forward, suddenly had no structure to drive against. The deflection lasted less time than it takes to register. What it produced was this. Raymond Coyle's right shoulder was past its intended control position, his weight was distributed in a direction his left foot was not prepared to receive, and his center of mass was moving forward at a speed he had generated himself. He did not fall, he checked himself. He planted his left foot, recovered his structure, and took 2 steps back to reset. He stood at 6 feet again. The 31 seconds were not finished. There is a specific silence that occurs in rooms full of trained people when those trained people witness something that exceeds their working model of what is possible. It is not the silence of confusion. It is the silence of recalibration, of 41 men quietly revising, without speaking, the internal architecture by which they evaluate physical capability. Gerald Hafner in the front row had not moved since the demonstration began. Both hands remained flat on his thighs. He was watching the man in the gray sweatshirt the way a structural engineer watches a building under load, looking for information, not spectacle. Seconds 4 through 9. Coyle attempted 4 more entries. He varied the initiation, changed the angle of approach, the lead hand, the distance of his opening step. He brought the full range of his curriculum to bear on the problem of making contact with a man standing 6 feet in front of him who appeared to be solving the same geometry problem considerably faster than he was generating it. Each attempt arrived at a version of the same result. Not a dramatic counter, not a throw or a strike or a technique of any visible kind. Simply, the position Coyle was entering was not occupied by the time Coyle arrived at it. Each time Chuck Norris used what appeared to the observers to be the minimum necessary movement, never more, never backward when sideways was sufficient, never sideways when 3 inches of weight transfer was sufficient. To be elsewhere. On the 9th second, Coyle stopped. He stood at 5 feet. He looked at the man in front of him. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "You're reading the initiation." Chuck Norris said, "I'm reading your weight." The room absorbed that. Second 14. What happened in seconds 10 through 13 will not be rehearsed here in sequence. Because what matters is the moment at second 14 when Raymond Coyle, with the particular combination of frustration and professional respect that is unique to men who are genuinely good at things and have encountered something genuinely better, stepped forward without a technique in mind. He simply stepped forward, closing the distance, committing his weight, testing whether proximity itself would change the calculation. It did not change the calculation. At second 14, Chuck Norris's left hand found Coyle's right wrist. Not forcibly, found it the way a person finds a door handle in a familiar room. The grip was not tight. It did not need to be tight. What it did was establish, in the geometry of Coyle's weight distribution and forward momentum, a reference point around which everything else was now organized. At second 15, Coyle's weight continued forward and met a structure that redirected it, downward and to his left in a movement so integrated with his own momentum that a person watching from the folding chairs would have required several subsequent viewings to confirm that it was something that had been done to Coyle rather than something Coyle had done to himself. At second 16, Raymond Coyle was on the gymnasium floor. On one knee, both hands on the mat, his weight fully committed to remaining there by a grip on his right wrist that was still not forcible, still not tense, still requiring no visible effort from the man standing above him. The room was entirely still. Chuck Norris waited 1 full second. 2 seconds. He did not look at the agents in the chairs. He was looking at the man on the floor in front of him with the measured attention that belongs to a person who is checking on something rather than watching something. At the 3rd second, he released the grip. He extended his right hand, open, palm up, at the level of Coyle's shoulder. Raymond Coyle looked at the hand. He took it. He came up from the floor. They stood facing each other at 2 feet. Chuck Norris said something. He said it at a volume that reached Coyle's ear and no further. What he said remained between the two of them for the length of that demonstration and for some years afterward. Raymond Coyle stood at the fork in the road that every person stands at in the moment after a public humbling. The road to the left is the road of the careful accounting, the muscle he was favoring, the unconventional angle, the circumstances that explain the gap between what should have happened and what did. The road to the right is shorter and costs more. He took the road to the right.
He turned to the 41 agents in the folding chairs. He said, "Gentlemen, I have just been given the most accurate demonstration of distance control that I have witnessed in 11 years of teaching this material. And I did not intend to give it. The room did not erupt. That is not what rooms of federal agents do. What the room did was exhale, collectively."
In the way rooms exhale when something that has been building pressure for several minutes is finally allowed to resolve. Gerald Hafner, in the front row, brought his hands together once, then the rest of the room followed. Chuck Norris did not acknowledge it. He turned back to Raymond Coyle. He said, "Do you want to do it again? Slower." Coyle said, "Yes." They spent the next 47 minutes on the gymnasium floor together, and what the agents in those chairs received that Tuesday was not the curriculum that had been scheduled for that morning. What they received was something that was not in any documentation, not available in any training manual, and not replicable by any institutional process. Access to the specific way a man who has spent 30 years solving the problem of distance thinks about that problem while he is solving it. 3 of the agents in that room subsequently revised elements of their own training programs based on what they carried out of Glencoe that day. One of them, the deputy U.S. Marshal from Phoenix, a man named David Reardon, wrote in a memoir published in 2004 that the 47 minutes following the demonstration were the most instructive 47 minutes of his professional training career. Gerald Hafner, the deputy director, spoke with Chuck Norris briefly as the session ended. He asked how he had identified the initiation point of Coyle's entries so consistently. Chuck Norris said, "The weight always moves before the hands do. If you watch the hands, you are always 1 beat behind." Hafner wrote that down. He carried the notebook out of the gymnasium. He still had it when he retired in 1994. As for what Chuck Norris said to Raymond Coyle at 2 feet, in the second after the grip was released and before the hand was extended, Coyle eventually disclosed it in a single account, given to a former colleague in 1997. He said, "Your curriculum is correct. Your entries are technically sound. You taught yourself to read resistance. The problem is that I am not resisting. If you look for resistance, you will always be looking in the wrong direction." Raymond Coyle carried that sentence for 22 years. He revised his curriculum twice. He retired from the FBI's Defensive Tactics Program in 2004 after 26 years of service, at his retirement function at a federal facility in Quantico. He gave a short address to the agents in the room. He said that the most significant lesson he had ever received in a training context had lasted 31 seconds and had been delivered by a man he had invited to the front of a gymnasium without knowing who he was asking. He said that what he had learned in those 31 seconds was the thing he had been teaching around for 11 years without ever reaching. He said the objective is not to overcome what is coming at you. The objective is to be somewhere else. And to make that somewhere else your idea. The 41 agents who were in that gymnasium in Glencoe, Georgia on a Tuesday in March of 1982 carried their accounts of the morning in slightly different forms. Some remembered the duration as 18 seconds. Some said 45. One agent, interviewed informally by a colleague in 2009, said the whole exchange could not have lasted more than 10 seconds, and that the 47 minutes after it were a memory so distinct and specific that he could still, at that late date, describe the angle of the light coming through the gymnasium's high windows. That is what happens to certain mornings. They do not dim with distance. They sharpen. Every year that passes adds a layer of clarity to the 31 seconds, as though the significance of the event requires time to fully develop, the way certain photographs require time in the dark before the image resolves. A man's reputation is built in the long afternoons, in the accumulation of ordinary days. But it is tested in the 31 seconds when a room full of the people most qualified to evaluate him is watching, and the outcome is not yet decided. What Chuck Norris carried into that gymnasium in a gray sweatshirt and worn training shoes was not a reputation performing itself. It was the thing underneath the reputation, the actual mechanism that had produced it, working quietly, without announcement, in exactly the way it had worked every other time it had been required. He left alone. He did not stay for the lunch that was arranged afterward. He signed no autographs. He spoke to no agents beyond the 47 minutes already accounted for. The customs agent from Jacksonville, who had been near the door when Chuck Norris departed, said that he paused once in the corridor outside the gymnasium and looked back through the doorway, briefly, at the room he was leaving. Then, he walked out. The lesson he left behind was not in the 31 seconds. The 31 seconds were only the proof. The lesson was in what the 31 seconds revealed about the distance between what a man believes he knows and what is actually available to be known. If a person is willing to stand at the front of a room in the gray sweatshirt and let the demonstration speak without assistance, the story a man tells about his capability and the capability itself are two different documents. Most careers are spent keeping the distance between those documents small. A few careers are spent eliminating the distance entirely. The agents who were in Glencoe that morning knew which kind they had witnessed. They knew it the moment they walked out into the Georgia afternoon, and the knowing did not leave them. It still has not left the ones who remain. Next week, we will be looking at what happened the night Chuck Norris walked into a closed rehearsal on a studio backlot in Burbank and a decorated stuntman with 14 years of film combat experience decided to test whether the technique on screen matched the man behind it. That story ends in a different way than anyone in that room anticipated. Subscribe now so you do not miss it. And leave your location in the comments below. We read every one.